The boy's cry cut through the morning air before anyone saw what was happening. One sharp sound, fear, hunger, shame all tangled together. And then there she was, Mara Ellison, her knees in the dirt, her arms around her son, trying to make herself small before a town that had already decided she was nothing. The baker's wife was shouting. Someone had said the boy stole bread. Someone else said he'd done it before, and Mara, trembling, still clutching Jamie's shoulders, kept saying, "He didn't steal. It was lying there. He thought it was thrown away." But the faces around her were hard. The kind that stop listening once they've made up their minds. She'd been here before, in the same silence, this same judgment. The day the mine collapsed, her husband's body never came back. They called it an accident. The company paid nothing, and the town, after a few weeks of pity, forgot the widow with the hungry boy. Now, as someone lifted a stick, Mara heard her own breath quicken. Not him, not again. She'd sold everything, his tools, her wedding band, even the last quilt her mother had sewn. Still the boy's belly ached. Still the world had no mercy. Then a voice rose above the noise, calm, low. "That's enough." The crowd turned. A man on horseback watched them from the edge of the road, dust on his coat, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much to care about gossip. Calder Boone. Folks in Dry Hollow called him the Quiet Rancher. Said he kept to himself since his wife passed 3 winters back. Said grief had burned the sound right out of him. He didn't move fast. Just guided the horse closer until the shadow of it fell over Mara and the boy. "You both come home," he said. No argument, no kindness in his tone either. Just something steady, something that made the crowd step back. Mara stared up at him, not understanding. "We don't need—" But the words wouldn't come. Pride didn't stand a chance when your child's lip was bleeding and your stomach had forgotten what bread was. So she rose, brushed the dust from her dress, and took Jamie's hand. The crowd parted, muttering. The baker's wife called after her, "He'll regret it." Maybe he would. But Calder didn't look back. The road out of town was quiet except for the creak of saddle leather and the soft scuff of Jamie's shoes in the dirt. Mara's thoughts twisted in every direction. Gratitude, shame, suspicion. Why would a man like him bother? What did he expect in return? Out here, nothing came free. When they reached the ranch, the house stood gray and weather-beaten, like the man himself. The gate leaned. The barn door hung half open. Yet everything smelled faintly of hay and smoke, alive in a way Mara hadn't felt in months. Calder dismounted, pushed the door open. "There's room by the stove," he said. His voice had that rough calm of someone who'd been alone too long. "You and the boy can rest." She wanted to refuse. To say, "We'll find another way." But Jamie had already crossed the threshold, drawn by the warmth. His small hands hovered near the iron stove, red from the cold. She followed, closing the door behind them. Inside silence. Not the cruel kind from town, the peaceful kind that carried the sound of wood crackling, of a kettle sighing. Calder set his hat on a peg, poured water into 2 tin cups. "You can leave when you like," he said. "No one's keeping you." She looked at him, really looked. The lines around his mouth spoke of a man who'd learned to live without expecting company. His shirt was mended, his boots dusty, yet his eyes held no demand, no pity, just weariness and something she couldn't name. Jamie had already fallen asleep by the stove, head on his mother's lap. Mara stroked his hair, her throat tightening. "We'll be gone in the morning," she told herself. But part of her already knew they wouldn't. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of the town behind them. Voices fading into dust. Calder stirred the fire, and the glow painted the room gold. He didn't look at her when he spoke, just said quietly, "No one should have to beg for mercy." And in that moment, Mara realized she'd been holding her breath for months. She let it go. The warmth from the stove reached her hands, and for the first time since the mine, she felt something like safety. She didn't trust it, not yet. But she didn't move away either. Morning came slow over the Boone ranch, a pale light slipping through the cracks of old pine boards. Mara woke to the sound of wind brushing against the shutters and the faint clatter of pots somewhere near the stove. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw Jamie curled beside her, his cheek pressed against her arm, breathing soft and steady. The boy hadn't slept like that in weeks. Across the room, Calder Boone moved quietly, pouring coffee, setting out a plate of biscuits he must have baked before dawn. The smell hit her first, real food. She hated that her stomach answered louder than her pride. "Coffee's there," he said without turning, voice steady, low. "Ain't strong, but it's hot." She hesitated. "We'll eat after we earn it." He half smiled, still facing the fire. "Didn't know you had to earn breakfast?" Mara didn't answer. She pulled the blanket tighter around Jamie, pretending to busy herself with his boots. But the warmth of the room, the simple peace of it, made her uneasy. Kindness was a rare thing out here, and every kindness had a hook if you waited long enough. Calder broke the silence first. "Fence out back needs mending. You can rest after." She looked up startled. "You're putting me to work?" He shrugged, finally turning toward her. "You looked like the type who'd rather be busy than beholden." And damn him, he was right. By noon, her palms were raw from gripping the fence post, the dry wind cutting through her shawl. Jamie followed Calder like a shadow, asking about the horses, the tools, the creek that ran behind the barn. The man barely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight, steady, measured, like someone who'd forgotten how to talk small. From a distance, Mara watched the two of them, her boy laughing at something Calder showed him, maybe how to tie a knot. It made her heart ache in a strange way. She wasn't used to seeing Jamie so free. Not since before the mine. Not since before everything went quiet. At supper, Calder set 3 plates without asking. Mara tried to protest, but he waved her off. "Eat. We'll talk after." The food was simple. Beans, bread, a bit of dried beef, but it tasted like more than it was. Jamie's eyes shone, cheeks full, crumbs all over his shirt. Mara caught herself smiling and quickly looked away. "You don't talk much," she said finally, needing to break the quiet. Calder leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Don't see the need. Talk never fixed what was broken." "And what was that?" she asked before she could stop herself. He didn't answer. Just glanced toward the fire, jaw tightening. Then softer. "Used to be 3 chairs here. 2's enough now." Mara looked at the empty space beside him, the way his eyes lingered there. Grief recognized its own kind. It didn't need explanation. That night, after Jamie fell asleep, Mara sat by the window, watching snow flurries drift across the dark fields. She could hear Calder moving in the barn, a steady rhythm of boots on wood, metal against metal. He worked long past reason, as if labor could keep ghosts at bay. She whispered into the stillness, "We won't stay long." But something deep down whispered back, "Then where will you go?" She didn't know anymore. The world outside these walls had been cruel, and this cabin, though filled with silence, didn't feel cruel at all. It felt waiting. When Calder finally came in, snow dusted his coat. He looked at her, not surprised she was still awake. "You don't owe me charity," she said quietly. He hung his coat, his back to her. "Then call it a trade. You keep the fire going. I'll fix the roof before it leaks again." A small smile touched her lips before she could stop it. The man had a way of ending arguments before they began. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin, the air stayed warm. Jamie murmured in his sleep. Mara pulled the blanket higher, the old ache in her chest easing just enough for her to breathe. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long this uneasy peace would last. But as she listened to the fire crackle and the quiet rhythm of Calder's breath across the room, one thought settled deep inside her. Maybe mercy wasn't always a trick. Maybe sometimes it was just a place to rest. Spring crept into the valley without anyone noticing at first. The snow melted slow, soaking the earth around Calder Boone's ranch until the ground gave off that deep, sweet smell of wet dirt and new life. Days stretched longer. The air carried the sound of windmills creaking and horses snorting in the pasture. Mara Ellison had been there nearly 3 months now, though she didn't count days anymore. At first she'd kept her shawl packed, her things folded neatly by the door, ready to leave when gratitude turned into obligation. But the door stayed shut. The shawl stayed on its peg. And somehow, the place began to feel less like a stranger's shelter and more like a pause between 2 storms. She and Calder rarely spoke more than they needed. But silence wasn't the enemy here. It was a language of its own. She'd learned how to read it. The way he cleared his throat before asking for a hand with the horses, or how he lingered near the stove when he wanted her to rest before supper. And she, in turn, spoke back with small gestures. A fresh loaf on the table. A mended shirt folded neatly by the chair, water fetched before he had to ask. Jamie, meanwhile, had taken to following Calder like a pup. The boy learned to saddle a horse, throw a rope, even whistle the way the ranch hands once did, before they left him alone with ghosts. Mara watched them from the porch, arms folded, heart caught between gratitude and fear. It scared her, how easily her son laughed again, how easily they both forgot to guard themselves. One evening, after a day of fixing fence posts, Calder sat sharpening a knife by the fire. Jamie was already asleep, sprawled on the floor beside a half-built wooden horse Calder had helped him carve. Mara spoke quietly, almost to herself. "You've been good to him." Calder didn't look up. "He's a good boy. Just needed a place where no one yelled." Her voice softened. "You're good with him." He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Wasn't always. My wife used to say I talked more to the cattle than I did to her." Mara hesitated. "She passed—" "How long ago?" He paused the blade mid-stroke. 3 winters. Fever took her fast. Quicker than I could fetch a doctor." The fire popped, filling the space where neither of them knew what to say next. "I lost mine in the mine collapse," Mara murmured after a moment. He went in for double pay. Said it was just one more shift. She looked at her hands. Funny how a single day can break your life clean in 2. Calder nodded slowly, eyes still on the blade. "You learn to keep going, but it don't ever stop hurting, just quiets down till something reminds you." Their eyes met briefly. 2 people who didn't owe each other explanations, yet somehow shared the same silence. Days passed like that, slow, ordinary, steady. Mara found herself humming again while she kneaded dough or hung clothes outside. Once she caught Calder listening from the doorway, pretending to adjust his gloves. He didn't comment, just gave a nod like he approved. That night, she sat on the porch, moonlight spilling across the yard. Calder joined her, leaning against the post, both watching the fireflies spark above the grass. "Town folks still talk?" he asked finally. "Probably," she said with a faint smile. "But I've stopped caring what they say." He grinned slightly. "Took me years to learn that trick." They fell quiet again, listening to the crickets. Inside, Jamie stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about horses. Mara's gaze softened. "He thinks you hung the moon," she said. Calder's voice was low, almost embarrassed. "Boy just needs someone steady." "You've been that," she said simply. He looked at her, the flicker of the lantern catching in his eyes. "And you've brought life back into this place. Wasn't much more than dust before you came." Mara felt the words settle somewhere deep, warm, and frightening. Because kindness like that was dangerous. It made you believe again. The night grew still. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much this peace meant, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she just nodded, letting the quiet do the talking. Inside, the fire burned low, but the room stayed warm. By midsummer, the valley looked near perfect. Fields golden, the air warm and heavy with wildflowers. You'd think peace had finally found a home there. But peace is a fragile thing in a small town. It doesn't take much to stir the dust again. It began the morning Mara Ellison rode into Dry Hollow for supplies. She hadn't planned on staying long, just flour, coffee, and a bolt of cloth for Jamie's new shirt. But whispers travel faster than horses, and before she'd even stepped out of the mercantile, she could feel them, the stares, the smirks, the quiet venom hiding under polite voices. "Boone's widow now, is she?" one woman murmured behind her. "Not by law, but maybe by supper," another said, and laughter followed. Mara's hands trembled as she tied the parcel. It wasn't the first time gossip followed her, but this cut deeper. Because this time they weren't entirely wrong. She had grown close to Calder. Maybe not the way they thought, but enough that the idea of leaving him made her chest ache. She kept her head high, paid in coins worn thin, and left without a word. Outside, the summer light was too bright to cry under, so she didn't. Back at the ranch, Calder was mending the gate when she rode in. He saw the look on her face and didn't have to ask. "They've been talking again." Her jaw tightened. "Same as always." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected it. "Let 'em talk. That easy for you?" She snapped. "You've got your land, your name. You can walk into town and no one blinks. But a woman without a man, she's fair game, isn't she?" He wiped the sweat from his brow, choosing his words with care. "You don't owe them your truth, Mara." She wanted to believe that. She wanted his calm. But nights are long when you carry shame that doesn't even belong to you. Days passed, but the whispers didn't. Jamie came home from town with a torn shirt and red eyes. "They said you're going to marry him 'cause he bought you, Mama." Mara froze. Calder was standing near the doorway, his shoulders stiff. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. She knelt, holding Jamie's face. "That's not true, sweetheart. You don't listen to them." But the damage was done. The boy's world had tilted, and so had hers. That night after Jamie slept, she sat by the fire while Calder stood at the window, silent. Finally, she said, "Maybe it's time we go." He turned slowly. "Go where?" "Anywhere that's not here." His voice was quiet, steady, almost pleading. "You think running fixes what they say?" "It stops me from being the reason you're branded a fool," she said, eyes bright with anger and sorrow. He stepped closer. "You think I care what they think?" "Yes," she whispered. "You care enough to pretend you don't." The fire popped. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Calder said softer, "You don't have to go." Mara shook her head, tears spilling now. "If I stay, they'll drag your name down. I can't do that to you." He reached out, almost touching her arm, then stopped himself. "Mara," but she'd already risen. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. "You've been kind. Kinder than anyone had a right to be. But this piece, it's borrowed time. And I've learned borrowed things never last." The next morning, before dawn, she packed quietly. Jamie clutched his small wooden horse, the one Calder helped him carve. The boy didn't understand, only whispered, "Will we come back?" Mara's throat ached. "Maybe," she said, though she didn't believe it. Calder stood on the porch as they rode away, hat in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. He didn't call out, didn't chase, just watched the dust rise behind them until it blurred the line between earth and sky. When the sound of hooves finally faded, the ranch fell silent again, emptier than before. Inside, the fire burned low, and the house that had felt like a home now echoed with what wasn't said.
The first snow of winter came early that year, quiet, steady, as if the land itself wanted to cover everything it had seen. Calder Boone watched it fall from the porch, the same porch where she'd stood months ago, her eyes full of hurt she never deserved. Since she'd left, the house had turned hollow again. The fire still burned, but it warmed no one. He kept busy the way lonely men do, fixing fences that didn't need fixing, mending gates that still held. But the silence followed him, clinging like dust to every room. Even the horses seemed to move quieter, as if they missed the sound of the boys' laughter too. Calder told himself he'd done the right thing letting her go. He told himself she was safer away from him, from the town's poisoned tongues. But every lie a man tells himself has an expiration date, and his had come. When word reached him that Mara and the boy were struggling in town, barely scraping by selling bread at the winter market, something inside him broke loose. Pride, maybe, or the foolish notion that he didn't need them. By noon the next day, he was riding into Dry Hollow under a gray sky. Snow dusted his coat and hat, the wind sharp enough to cut. The town looked smaller than he remembered, meaner somehow. He found her near the market square, wrapped in the same old shawl, face pale from the cold. Jamie stood beside her, trying to sell what was left of the bread she'd baked. A few folks passed without looking. Others stared just long enough to whisper. Calder dismounted slow, boots crunching over the frozen ground. Mara saw him before he spoke. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she straightened, chin high. "You shouldn't have come." "Maybe not," he said, voice rough from the cold, or maybe from everything he'd kept unsaid. "But I did." She folded her arms, defensive, tired. "We're fine." He glanced at the nearly empty basket, at Jamie's too thin coat. "Doesn't look fine." She flinched. "I told you, we didn't come here for pity." He nodded slowly. "And I didn't come to offer it." The wind howled through the street. A few bystanders paused, pretending not to watch. Calder stepped closer. "Still trying to pay debts that aren't yours?" Her eyes flickered, a flash of the same pride that had carried her this far. "What else can I do?" He reached into his coat, not for money but for something small. A folded scrap of wood worn smooth. the tiny horse Jamie had carved that spring. He left this behind. The boy's eyes widened. You kept it. Calder nodded. I ain't much for throwing away what matters. Mara's throat tightened, but she stayed silent. Calder took a slow breath. You said once you'd leave before folks made me pay for kindness. But truth is, Mara, I already did. Every day you been gone. Her lip trembled. Don't say that. I'm not a skin for thanks, he said softly. Just for you both to come home. Not out of guilt. Not 'cause you owe me. Because that house ain't home without you in it. The boy looked between them, voice small. Mama, can we? Mara turned away, blinking fast. The sound of snow under boots, the smell of wood smoke, the quiet waiting in Calder's eyes. It all pressed too close. She'd fought so long to survive alone. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to. When she finally met his gaze, something in her steadiness broke. Not weakness, just surrender to the truth she'd been running from. You sure? She whispered. Calder's answer was simple. Never been surer. And that was all. The ride back to the ranch was silent, but not the kind that hurts. Jamie dozed against her, and Mara watched the familiar land reappear through the falling snow. The barn, the hills, the porch light glowing warm in the dusk. Inside, Calder stirred the fire, the room filling with that old golden light. Jamie laughed at something small and silly, the sound echoing like a promise. Mara set her shawl aside, breathed deep and felt. Finally, like the running was done. Outside, the snow fell soft and endless. Inside, the warmth held steady. And for the first time in a long, hard life, home didn't feel like a place she borrowed. Felt like something she'd earned.